Thank you, Mr. Habenero, for joining me on my coffee break. I'm drinking a black coffee at this time. Do you have a coffee?
I do not. I did not prepare. I had a coffee earlier. You know what? Actually, I do have a coffee. I have a uh slightly above room temperature black coffee from McDonald's, and it's cold and not tasty, but it is coffee and I do have it.
You and my mom are the ones that got me to read Shogun, which is a great book. Thank you for that.
Totally. No problem. It's definitely a favorite of mine. I kind of went through it in one go when I was working one particular job because they used to give me hour-long breaks, and I would read it on my hour-long breaks, and I loved it, and I'm glad I can recommend it to other people because it's a great story.
So, the series, if I recall correctly, altogether is called the Asian Saga.
The Asian Saga, yeah, all written by James Clavell. He's got a huge collection of books though, so it's a pretty complex series, but yeah, pretty much.
Have you read all of the Asian Saga?
Oh, absolutely not. It's that's so much reading.
So, why do you recommend Shogun to people then?
It is probably one of the best like fictional stories I've ever read. It's like historical fiction. I know that's quite a thing to say considering fiction encompasses so much. Um, but I just it's one of those stories where I can definitely say that like when you first start reading it, it's a little rough to get into. I remember it being a slow kind of slog in the very beginning. But just the fact that it's one of those books where it's not just like a story about one character. It's a story about a collection of characters in a variety of different levels of importance in the political system that they, live in. And they're just all really fascinating characters. There's lots of ups and downs. It's it's not really, even though there is one main character who is going through his own very specific journey, that's not like the only thing that the book focuses on. In It's kind of like it's almost like looking into a window of time and seeing all the different characters within that frame of time, and they're kind of living their lives, and it makes them, like obviously, like, it has a lot to do with the old emperors and, the shogunate and all that stuff, and it does get into the complexity of that. But and a lot of the characters are within that system, so it's not like you're following peasant lives, obviously. But just reading how the characters are so natural and realistic, they have very human like emotions, I guess you would say. You can kind of like empathize with them real well. And it's just interesting because they feel like they're real people with like a relative level of power based on what position they have in the storyline. So it's fascinating because I think that the characters are so deep in that story. They're very well fleshed out. And, you know, like obviously the romance between Mariko and the main character, the main character, air quotes, like watching their love story and their romance and like what direction that goes in is super interesting because it's not like a stereotypical romance story. There's lots of ups and downs in it, and just I don't know. And the there's so much to that book. I'm just kind of remembering all the stuff that happens in that book because there is so much. Let me tell you, that book is a tome. It is a tome. It's like straight up like pulling a giant. Like there are times where I was like reading it and I'm just like, oh man, this book is so gigantic. And then other times when I'm going through it and I'm just like, no, this like the pages just flow. Like the story's so good. that you can just make your way through it, and you'd be surprised how fast you go through it once you're like absorbed into the story. But
Isn't it about the same length as all three Lord of the Ring books?
oh my goodness, I don't. You know what? You're making me pull my copy off the shelf. Luckily, I do in fact keep I do in fact keep my books like very close. Or at least I have the ones from Clavel really close here. So Shogun, I'm flipping. Oh my god, it is gigantic. Sorry, sniffly nose. Shogun is 1,210 pages. It's absurdly gigantic. I don't know if it's actually the same size as the Lord of the Rings books. But it's big. You definitely have to kind of. Oh god, it's gonna take me forever to get that back in the shelf. Well, I'll worry about it later. You definitely have to dedicate. Like that's the thing is I've read a few different books that are like that where they're absurdly long stories. They're books that are like the size of tomes, and you just kind of have to tell yourself, you know what, I'm just going to dedicate to this, and you just go for it. And as you're going through it, you realize it was totally worth it. You know, like even with that massive page count, and then you can show off and be like, I read a book that was 1,210 pages. Ooh, look at me. So it's a big one for sure.
Do you think I cheaped out by getting it in audiobook format?
No, not at all. I think that so for me personally, and I've talked to people about this before. I have a thing about physically holding books and reading the material. It just kind of has a feeling that I prefer, and that's just me. But I think that anybody who can absorb the story in whatever format is best for them, should definitely do so because I mean, there's no reason to gatekeep something like book reading. Especially when we're kind of in this current culture where, in my opinion, movies are definitely not that great lately, and knowing that there are other mediums to enjoy a high quality story that is not necessarily being read as a book or being watched as a movie, I think people should have that opportunity. So like Shogun's a great story and reading it is intimidating, but if you want to like have that experience, and you get that experience from listening to it as an audiobook, you definitely should. Like, cause it's just a great story, and great stories should be shared in whatever way possible. It's unfortunate that a lot of the time when it goes to a movie, it feels like they take out all the good parts. But I feel like in an audiobook, I would assume, as far as I'm aware, that that doesn't happen because it's literally the entire book being read. So if you're able to, it's kind of like the idea of like, oh, the anime is never as good as the manga or whatever. It's kind of like that, but it's like with an audiobook, it's literally somebody reading the book to you, and you're absorbing it that way because your brain just is more comfortable that way doing so, and you get the chance to enjoy a great story without being edited or changed or whatever. So no, I don't look down on you for, enjoying the audiobook. Like, I mean, it's fine. Enjoy things that you enjoy, my friends.
Speaking of adaptations, have you watched the original miniseries or played any of the video games or seen the Broadway play that is based off of Shogun?
I have I mean, I've heard that the miniseries is really good. But I have not personally experienced Shogun in any way outside of the book. Not for any particular reason. It's just never, I don't go out of my way for things like that. So, like, if it's just like, hey, here's Shogun the miniseries, I'll be like, oh, okay, I can make some time for that. I guess if it's right in front of me. But I read the book and I had the experience, and that's good enough for me. But I haven't seen Shogun presented in any other fashion outside of the book. No.
I've debated getting the miniseries from the original miniseries from the library a few times.
Yeah, I've heard it's pretty good. I think my father told me it was really good at one point, but I have not seen it. I'd be curious to see it and then kind of give it a comparison to the book. But I feel lucky to have read the book before ever seeing the series, so I don't know. It was just one of those things where I saw the book, it'd been sitting on my shelf for a long time, and I'm like, I'm gonna read this because it's about samurai and it's got swords and things like that. So I'm gonna just dedicate to it, and it was worth it. So
It's not. It doesn't focus on the politics, but when it goes into the politics, it's very well done. You know what I mean?
yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, James Clavell is a fantastic writer. He, if I remember correctly, it was something like he was like stationed in Japan or he lived in Japan for a period of time, and that's when he was really focusing on writing these stories because he had like a fondness for just like Japanese history and things like that. And it was like he understood like old Japanese history so well that he was able to present those political systems in a way that made sense, so that you could tie it to, the real history of Japan. So he put enough thought and work into it so that it makes sense and you're not questioning it, and it lines up relatively well. But it's not overbearing, right? It's not like, a slog to get through because it's more like they go into the intriguing parts of the politics that like matter directly to the characters and story. So it, adds drama, like it affects the characters directly, rather than you sitting back and them giving you a what is it, an exposition of like the entire, political system, based on ranking and who's who and what's what, so you don't have to sit back and snore through that. They just make it make sense enough so that when the characters need to be affected by it, they are. And that's what makes it so good is because it's tied to real history, and but it's utilized in a fictional way that makes the characters a lot more, sticking around and learning about.
Are all of James Clavell's books big enough to kill someone with?
Well, okay. It's actually funny. I have a couple other James Clavell novels that I plan to get through, and one of them is a hardback, and it looks like a slab of stone. Like it looks like if you hit somebody over the face with it, they might not get back up.
Well, thank you for joining me on my coffee break. I have to get back to my chores.
Yeah, of course.
And as I said in the beginning, thank you for recommending Shogun to me.
Absolutely. If you ever are interested in other book recommendations, I have no problem telling you about some. One of them that keeps coming back and forth into my life is a book that I adore called House of Leaves. Heavily recommend it. It's very scary and very interesting. And that book, it's a horror story. And that book scared me so bad that I couldn't read it while I was inside of buildings, because being inside of buildings while reading that book made me extremely uncomfortable.